Mula sa palasyo,
Straight from the palace.
two of the most trusted DDS voices have joined forces.
Para ihatid sa inyo ang mga kwento sa likod ng balita.
Unhampered, unadulterated, exclusive, behind the scene.
Exclusive behind the scenes.
Programang para sa masa.
Ang DDS Podcast.
Magandang araw mga ka-DDS. Ako po si Mocha Uson at kasama po tayo sa Philippine delegation dito sa UN upang makibahagi sa 73rd session ng United Nations General Assembly. For the second straight year, si Department of Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano ang naghatid ng mensahe ng Pilipinas sa high-level general debate na may temang Making the United Nations Relevant to All People, Global Leadership and Shared Responsibilities for Peaceful, Equitable and Sustainable Societies. Narito po ang ilan sa mga highlights ng mensahe ni Secretary Cayetano sa UN General Assembly.
We live in a world that is fast becoming bigger, but constantly getting smaller. From families to clans, to tribes, to a federation of tribes which we call a nation, now we are but one global village. And with tools like the internet and social media, everything is known and communicated in real time. Thus, nowadays, we are all neighbors, all members of the same global community. We rise up together, we suffer together. Being connected to each other all the time has transformed the world into a global community, and we are all citizens of this world. Today, our social contract is no longer confined to our nation state. We should therefore exert efforts to connect, to emphasize commonalities and not differences, to think that we are less Filipinos, Americans, Chinese, French, Russians, and to think that we are more of ourselves as global citizens, the people of the United Nations. Yes, it is true that we need not always act with a united front, or we don't always have to act as a community. But neither can we ignore the fact that there are many problems which can only be solved by a united global community. The Philippines, under the leadership of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, is one with the United Nations in being uncompromising on the issues of rule of law, just and equitable peace that leads to order, development, and prosperity, and the protection of each and every human being's rights. As a sovereign and democratic country led by a duly elected president, we are on track in salvaging our deteriorating country from becoming a narco state, or a state held hostage by the rich and powerful who ignore the plight of the poor, powerless, and marginalized, or worse, both. The hunger for change, for peace, for law and order is genuine. There is passion to improve our economy so that the more than 100 million Filipinos abroad may choose to work at home or abroad and not be forced by poverty or lack of quality jobs to go abroad to find high-paying jobs at the expense of leaving the country and separating families. And those at home may at the very least live a safe and comfortable life. We may somehow and sometimes differ in how we express ourselves, yet this should not be interpreted as turning our backs on the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. On the contrary, the Philippines and President Duterte are instituting all these reforms to be able to protect the rights of every single Filipino and every single human being living in the Philippines. Yes, the rights of all Filipinos and all human beings, if that is at all possible. But in case where we have to choose between protecting the rights of a law-abiding citizen and the law enforcer versus the drug lord or criminal who seeks to kill and destroy, it is clear that we will protect the former, the law enforcer and the law-abiding citizen. Wouldn't you do the same? Making the United Nations relevant to all is difficult. It is a dream, yet it is a dream worth fighting for. The Filipino people will remain to be persistent in our quest for peace, order, development, and prosperity, and the quest for a safe and comfortable life for all those living in the Philippines. We will continue to have faith, but put actions to our faith, and we will continue to love our nation and not only preach, but actually do what we preach.
Gaano ba kahalaga ang partisipasyon ng Pilipinas sa taunang United Nations General Assembly at bakit tayo dumadalo rito? Para ipaliwanag ang importansya ng partisipasyon ng ating bansa, narito ang ating panayam kay Ambassador Teodoro Locsin Jr., ang Philippine Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York.
I was wondering myself, some of these titles that they use for the names, for the themes of UN Assembly meetings and big summits, sometimes they seem like they don't mean anything. But we're very fortunate today because the first one to speak was someone who appears to be at odds with the United Nations, US President Trump, and he just explained it perfectly. That he's looking to a world where, as I was saying, I know you'll notice that when he ends his speech, he says, not God bless America, but God bless the nations of the world. That's really something, because he's often seen as a critic of the United Nations. But here he is, God bless the nations of the world, after he weaves like Joseph's multicolored coat, a multicolored tapestry of individual nations, each one distinct, but all of them free, independent, prosperous, and with governments who are so responsible, they are able to take care of their people back home. And this is why he opposes the Compact on Migration. About that, something else, because we strongly espouse that. It's not a treaty, but I can go into that later. But apparently, he has found what is supposed to be the arch critic of the United Nations echoes the theme set by Antonio Guterres. Well, I think it was relevant not just under my leadership, but certainly from the founding. We are charter members of the United Nations, and what is unique about us is that we were members of the United Nations when we were not a nation. The Americans included us in the founding of the United Nations. We were still part of the United States, a territory of the United States, a Commonwealth. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why the Charter of the United Nations does not say we, the states of the United Nations, but we, the peoples of the United Nations. And I think the Americans put us there to say, hey, we're not looking at governments, we're looking at people. And that's what the United Nations is all about. So, and we have been very active in that. We were active in war and in peace. The Korean War, we were there in that UN police action. We are there. Most famously, we were there when the Soviet leader Khrushchev banged his shoes. Do you know why? Because Sumulong, our ambassador at that time, denounced communism in the United Nations. So we always make a difference. People were going along because the Soviet Union was a founder also of the United Nations. But when things go wrong, Filipinos will stand up and say, this is wrong. And by the way, that's the reason why why there is a United Nations. When I first came to the United Nations, I remember the president was so irritated with the UN. He said, I'm going to burn down that UN. And they asked me, so what are you going to do if your president wants to burn down the UN? I said, simple, I'll bring a fire extinguisher. So I'm the only one alive. But you see, the UN is a place where you go to criticize other nations, people who take our territory, people who abuse our people, states that abuse our people. You go there and you denounce them from the podium. You do not denounce the podium because we are the United Nations. In fact, I have insisted on not being called Ambassador Locsin. I'm not an ambassador. You can only be an ambassador to a foreign country. But the United Nations is not foreign to us. We are integral to the United Nations. We founded it. So you're there, that's the forum, and from there you air your grievances, or better than grievances, you show your commitment to the aims of the United Nations. I think that's why we're here. We're not here to push for our national interest. Hey, you know where you push your national interest? You push that from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Manila, and you push that to our armed forces if there are threats. But here, you're here because you share the aims of the UN, the liberation of people, their life of progress, decency, their protection from human rights abuses. That's why we're here. And we're here because we're committed to that. In the things that are not so well known but are important, such as in the what we call the ECOSOC, it has its own chamber on economic and social issues. You know that the Philippines has the experts, and they turn to us, the members of the New York mission of the Philippines, not as Filipinos. They turn to us as experts. Not me. I'm just an appointee, a political appointee. But the mission generally serves the UN. Their learning is incredible. Their ability to balance views is just part of their professionalism. Auditing is a Filipino preserve here. So we're just there. We're just good at that. In peacekeeping, we have never had a single abuse. I didn't learn this here, but I was told by my friend Nonoy Baceta when he was briefly ambassador to Iraq that when Philippine peacekeepers were recalled, the communities there who usually hate foreigners were crying why the Filipinos were leaving, because they really care. If that's their job, is to protect the population, they give it their all. No hesitation. So we are really preeminently a United Nations country. And the significance, again, I have to keep going back to that, is the fact that we are charter members and we are very active here. Perhaps not in a controversial way, because we contribute. We don't detract from the mission of the United Nations. We help it achieve its aims. So very quietly we do all that work, and they have to hear from the Philippines, because our contributions are always positive. The priorities, again, as I said, are the priorities of the UN as each year unfolds. We contribute as much as we can. We are leading proponents and contributors to the Global Compact on Migration, with which Trump, by the way, does not agree, but we do. The usual criticism is that it's not a treaty. How can you enforce it? Supposing we made that a treaty. How do you enforce a treaty on a foreign country? Of course you can't. So it's better to call it by what it is, a compact, an agreement willingly entered into by all countries, those who send out migrants, those countries through whom migrants transit, and the countries that receive them. That at the very least, and the Philippines was the one that articulated this, because they were fighting about what are rights, what are, what are obligations. And I said, what about this? Let's start with this. The one thing we all do is we treat them with decency. And when we had a conference in Manila right after the Global Compact was approved in the United Nations, the formality is in Marrakesh. Secretary Cayetano gave a speech which first astounded me, because he said, the Global Compact of Migration is inspired by love thy neighbor. I was wondering, what does he mean by that? And he said, when people, you cannot, sometimes you get irritated with your neighbor. Maybe they're too noisy, maybe they have karaoke, and so you get angry, but he's still your neighbor. And you must, when he's in danger, you know you will go to his rescue. When he needs something, he will help. You will help him as he will help you. So I was still wondering, what is he talking about? And then he said, when strangers are outside your neighborhood and they move in, you may not even like them because you don't know who they are. But guess who they are? They're your neighbors. And what did Jesus say? Love thy neighbor. Tolerate him. Help him. The road to Marrakesh is important because it's not legally binding, okay? And then some people make fun of that, as if you could actually have a legally binding instrument. On sovereign states, each of us has an army. We have a formidable army. I don't think anybody can impose anything on us if we don't want it. Not even any multilateral institution or whatever they call themselves. They can't. But what we can do, sovereign states, is we can agree to this kind of behavior. And the behavior is basically, we defined it, decent. What you wouldn't do to your friend, what you wouldn't want done to you. Come on, don't do it to strangers passing through your country. And that's it, it's important to us. And by the way, they say, yeah, but you can't enforce it. No, you can't. But it's a template. It's a standard of behavior. It's just there. And when you don't follow that, when you don't fulfill that aim, what do you look like? If I may use the word, you look like a jerk. And nobody in the world wants to look like a jerk. No country does. And I think that's a great achievement. And that's why some countries who are, at the moment, anti-migrants, they're afraid of something that is not even legally enforceable. You know why? Because it judges them. So that's it. And the contribution of the Philippines there is really recognized. The language, people fight over words. It's always the Filipinos are able to temper the debate and say, there's a way of saying it. Don't get angry. You can agree on this. That's it. So we're very much the Filipino child. My message is, when I was growing up, I always tell this also to the Secretary General when they complain no one helps the UN anymore, the support for the UN is dwindling, especially among the major powers like the United States. I said, because the public has forgotten you. When I was growing up, I'm quite old, even in a tabloidish paper, you know, about crime, that was always the headline. There may be the headline, a woman chopped to pieces, but guess what's beside it? United Nations actions, United Nations decisions. It was very much a part of our political life and the life of almost everyone in the world. When Dag Hammarskjöld died in a crash in the Congo, the world cried. Then suddenly now we don't care. So what happened there? Partly the fault of the UN for not publicizing its activities more. Partly the hatred among nations now, it's gotten quite worse, and the loss of any sense of commonality. Like, these are the things we all believe in. We may disagree with each other, but these things we cannot compromise. That seems to be going. But I think all I'm going to ask the Filipino people is, the UN matters a lot. You know, you're not a nation. Don't think you can pull out of the UN. You pull out of the UN, you're not a country. Think about it. Why do you think Taiwan, a major economic power, a vibrant democracy, it has every qualification to be a member, but it's not, because there can only be one country. And there it is. Why do they want? Because you're only half a state. You're only half a country. And that's where we are. And so we should value that. We should be a little careful about dismissing the United Nations. Because if you dismiss it, it's no skin off my nose. It's the skin off the nose of the country.
Bukod sa pagbibigay ng country statement, nakipag-meeting din si DFA Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano sa kanyang kapwa foreign ministers mula sa iba't ibang bansa. Ang Pilipinas ang isa sa mga founding state members ng United Nations. At tayo ay naging kabahagi nito noong October 24, 1945. Hindi matatawaran ang naging kontribusyon ng Pilipinas sa UN at patuloy tayong susuporta sa organisasyon na ito. This year, isa na namang success ang partisipasyon ng Pilipinas sa taunang General Assembly. At tayo po ay naging saksi sa mga kaganapang ito, mga ka-DDS. Mula rito sa United Nations Headquarters, ako po si Mocha Uson. Maraming salamat po sa inyong panonood. Solid!
Mula sa palasyo,
Straight from the palace.
two of the most trusted DDS voices have joined forces.
Para ihatid sa inyo ang mga kwento sa likod ng balita.
Unhampered, unadulterated, exclusive, behind the scene.
Exclusive behind the scene.
Programang para sa masa.
Ang DDS Podcast.